Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition. And I want to talk about what you would do with $1 million if you got $1 million windfall. And so like a lot of things, we're going to have a financial component and then an emotional component with this. I did write a column about this probably several months ago. And when I write columns, I'm limited to 600 words. We get a lot more words with a podcast. So I wanted to dig into some of this. So the first article that I derived my information from was a article written March 28th of 2023 by Jessica Whitehouse. And you can find it at onlinegambling.com. And they asked that question to people. What would you do with $1 million in lottery winnings? Now, when I saw that headline, I just mentally responded, blow it. And then as I began reading it, I was kind of surprised. And I'm going to summarize everything and then I'll get into it. Well, why don't I just get into it specifically? The number one thing that people said they would do with the money is buy a house. Now, about 50% of everybody answering it said this is the number one thing they would do. Of course, that's an average, and when you break it down between men and women, just over 64% of women said they would buy a house, and 36% of men say they will buy a house. And the age group that typically was answering this in the affirmative was in the 27 to 42 age group. Well, this makes a lot of sense. That younger people would be more interested in buying a house, and it's possible the older respondents to this may have either had a house, but that wouldn't keep somebody from saying, oh, I'd buy a house because I'd want a bigger house. But that was number one, and who can argue with buying a house? Seems to be pretty logical. The second most popular thing was to invest it. Now, it was a distant second. From 50% that would buy a house, it was 17% that would invest it. And this was more common among men. 23% of men said they would invest it. 9.5% of women said they would invest it. It was also the least popular answer amongst the older demographic. So the younger a person was, the more inclined they would be to invest it. And I'll make up a story that that's probably because the younger you are, the less you have, the more time you have versus the older you are. It could be some of the older respondents felt they had all they need or felt they had very little time left and wanted to spend it in other ways. But it was, amongst all the options, the second one. The third most popular was to pay off debts. Paying off student loans were huge among these, and it was 13% of everybody that would pay off debts. 16% of women would pay off debts. 10% of men would pay off debts. So, of the top three, all of them make sense financially. Nobody's saying they'd blow it. The fourth most common thing they would do with the money is travel the world. Again, this was most common in the 27 to 42-year-old range. And they didn't give us the specific statistics for that. And then number 5 that people would do with $1 million would be to start a business. And in looking at the data, this again was more popular with millennials and Gen Z, I believe. So, I thought that was pretty interesting. And they had it down by states, you know, what the top one would be with various states like Wyoming and Minnesota would invest it. Folks that live in Montana would give it away, fund a charity. There aren't too many states that led that. South Dakota and Nebraska, interestingly enough, would retire early. And buy a house was popular in California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. I mean, I could just go on and on that one. So that was interesting to me. The Gen Zers, they would, number 1 would be invest it, number 2 would be a house, number 3 would be travel the world, number 4 would be pay off debts. Millennials would buy a house, invest it, travel the world, pay off debts. Start a business was 5th on both of those. And men, they would invest it, buy a house, pay off debts, start a business. Women would buy a house, pay off debts, travel the world, and invest it. So this was kind of interesting to me. It kind of blew my preconceived idea that people would blow it. Why do I have that preconceived idea? Well, I remember seeing studies, over the past decades that indicated 40 to 50% of people blow through an inheritance in around 5 years. So that's a little bit of where my thoughts were, that around people blowing it. Well, I started digging around because I just thought, there's something missing here. There's got to be another aspect to this that I was missing. And I found a really good article by Jay Zagorski. And he is a former professor at Ohio State University. And you can find him online if you find this column. I've got that link in there. He wrote an article, winner of 1.5 billion Powerball faces long odds, but even longer odds of keeping it. And he posted this in a blog on January 12th, 2016. Now, in looking for this, I just thought, sounds like a little confirmation bias. I didn't want to believe that people would actually do smart things with the money. I hope that wasn't the case, but it's just, there was something I really wanted to research on it. So in his research, he summarized that his data suggests many people, quickly spend any unexpected windfalls. All right. He said other studies found that instead of getting people out of financial trouble, winning the lottery got people into more trouble, since bankruptcy rates soared for lottery winners 3 to 5 years after winning. All right. This is a little bit of conflicting data. So my need for certainty couldn't stop there. Okay, what's going on here? Zagorski cited a paper that was written in 2001 by Guido Imbens, I-M-B-E-N-S, and Bruce Sacerdote, S-A-C-E-R-D-O-T-E, and statistician Donald Rubin. And they found that lottery winners saved only 16 cents of every dollar won. All right, what does saved mean? Because we know, I think it was 13% of the people in the survey, well, 17% of the people in the survey would invest it. Well, if investing is saving, that would be spot on. But to make that stat work, we'd have to assume that buying a house was not saving money. And we'd have to assume that paying off debts wasn't saving money. So I don't know exactly what they meant with that. And they pointed out that overall research shows lottery winners and people getting windfalls spend or blow through much of the money. All right. Well, so when I think of spend, I don't think of buying houses. I don't think of investing, of course. I don't think of paying off debt, but maybe they do. But if they spent the money in that way, I doubt that so many people would be going bankrupt or would be out of money in 3 to 5 years. So a lot of this, we've got to try and lean into it and see what was meant by these words, what was tracked. Now, admittedly, by the first survey, while 80% of people would buy a house, pay off debts, or invest it, that means 20% of them would, I think, arguably by anybody's definition, spend it. It included money to travel the world, start a business, which you might say, well, isn't that investing? Well, it isn't a safe investment, depending on stats you follow. Most businesses that are started fail by 7 years, 10 years, etc. Just like I'm guessing only 1 in 5 people is built to own real estate. It's probably less who have the capacity to run a business because there's so much involved. So I wouldn't say starting a business is a conservative thing, but for some it could be great. Giving to charities, well, that's really helpful to communities in the world, but it's still spent. They still don't have that. Buying luxury vehicles is in there, getting cosmetic procedures. Buying a private island was listed many times, and going into space. So all of these are spending activities, again, except starting the business, which typically doesn't end well. So that's easy. But if 80% of everything is invested in things that build wealth, how do you end up going bankrupt in 3 to 5 years? Well, the factor that Zagorski describes pretty clearly and understandably is the impact that taxes have on lottery winnings. $1 million jackpot you're probably going to pay, 35 to 60% of it in federal, state, and local tax. But that's no reason that you're not going to have the money in 4 to 5 years. You're just not going to have $1 million or $1 billion. You can just rule of thumb say 35, 40% or half of that goes away to taxes. I think the biggest reason for the disconnect between the online gambling survey and Zagorski's research can be boiled down to the difference between people's perception and people's reality. This is where we get into the emotional side of this. There's often a substantial gap between our intentions, what I should do, what I want to do, what I ought to do, and our behavior, what I will do, what I do. So I think this is where perception departs from reality. I could fill a book with stories from my real estate days, certainly from 40 years of being in the financial advice profession, that I've known who lost substantial sums, and sometimes everything they had, i.e. bankruptcy, in real estate and the stock market. So think about this. If you take all the money you win in lottery and put it into real estate, you're probably going to be relatively okay if you don't borrow, if you pay everything down. But you can take $1 million and leverage that into, I would think, somewhat easily into $5 million of real estate, probably $10 million of real estate, which means you have loans. And that's what can really get you. And I know that all too well. I think I've probably told the story before. In the 80s, in our town, we have a military base, and the B-52s left, and it was a 2-year gap before the B-1s came in. We had 25% vacancy rates almost overnight. And I remember during that time, I had a $1,500 a month negative cash flow. And this was back, trying to remember, maybe the 80s. $1,500 a month negative cash flow if everything was rented. And I remember one of my mentors saying, in the long run, investing in real estate will work out, but you've got to be around for the long run. And that's the problem. Typically, people over-leverage themselves in real estate, or they buy into commercial properties or residential apartments that require real expertise to manage, and they can get themselves into trouble. And the same thing with the stock market. If you think of some recent things like the GameStop phenomena, BlackBerry, where these stocks went from dollars a share up to double digits, even triple digits per share. And you get involved in one of those, I want to say scams, but, or say cryptocurrency. Well, that's investing it, but not really. It's speculating. And a lot of people think speculating is investing. So you can easily lose it all. And then in the stock market, you can also borrow. It's called margin. So you can take $1 million, you can buy $2 million worth of stocks. Or you can put it in the futures market, or you can take $1 million and control $100 million of a commodity. Like a 1% move, and you've lost your million. And this is often what people are drawn to when they think of investing in real estate or the stock market. Same thing with buying a home. That's investing in real estate. Typically, you'll see a person kind of put a minimum down on a home and buy a home that's way more than they could have afforded in the past. Well, you got the money now, right? And the problem becomes if they put 80% of their winnings down on this house and they have a big mortgage, they blow the rest of it pretty soon. Where am I going to get the cash to keep the maintenance and pay the taxes on everything to keep this house up? And often they can lose the house. So I thought, okay, this is making a little more sense, because we got a lot of oughts and shoulds around what I should do and then what I actually do. Because remember, the first part of this survey was, what would you do with $1 million? We don't have the data that says what they did do with $1 million. So I suspect 50% didn't go out and buy a house and 17% didn't invest it. And when they did, it may not have been prudent or with knowledge. So that, as I thought through this, that really kind of connected all the dots, especially the perception and the reality. What I say I'm going to do and what I actually do. So both the academic research and the stories of of various lottery winners that I've read suggest people quickly spend through inheritances and windfalls, regardless of their perceptions or their best intentions. And this is why my friend Susan Bradley, who's author of Sudden Money and started the Financial Transitionist Institute, suggests a person should get professional help to process the huge life transition that presents itself when you have a sudden money event. And a sudden money event certainly is a lottery, winning a lottery, but it's also getting an inheritance or a huge signing bonus. Susan works with a lot of NFL players. Anything where you get what is a lot of money to you quickly. And a lot of money to you is not specific to dollar terms. For somebody, it could be 100 million, and another person it might be 10 million, and another person it might be 1 million, and to another person it could be 10,000 would be a sudden windfall. So she suggests that a person goes into a decision-free zone, the DFZ, where you put the money safely in the bank and you take some time to really align your perceptions with the reality of your current financial status. Because most people are not trained, are not emotionally ready to handle a windfall, to handle money like this. And so there's a lot of reading a person can do. Susan has a website, Financial Transitionist, with people that she has trained in a financial transition. Because everything in your life it doesn't have to change, but it's going to change. It's going to change. And it's getting ready and preparing for that and having good support as you go through that. It's a time of passage when things can be kind of topsy-turvy before you come out on the new normal side. So you can do some wonderful things with sudden money, with windfalls. You can even spend some of it. And it takes some knowledge to do things with it where it won't be wasted or it won't take you to financial ruin. I've said this before. I used to have a lady who worked for me. And she, at that time, I think she made $45,000 or so, and she was the breadwinner for her family. She was, I think when she worked for me, she was in her 60s, maybe older. And she won $300,000 in a lottery. And about a year later, she said, I wished I'd never seen that money. It brought me more heartache than it was worth. I also remember early on, she was just angry. She came in and said, do you know they took 1/3 of my money? I said, well, yeah, that sounds about right. Oh, I'm not rich. I'm not a rich person. I make $45,000 a year. And I said, well, you were rich the year you won it. The tax code measures wealth and your annual income. So that was something she never knew. She just assumed you had to be worth $1 billion to be taxed heavily. Well, and didn't understand it was tied to income. So that produced a lot of frustration for her, and anger and sadness, and then just all the emotional issues and family issues that the rest of the money caused. So it's really, really important to prepare for that and to get good counsel. And most people don't. It could be all sorts of biases, all sorts of emotional things that keep me from asking for help. It can be a lot of financial trauma that would keep me from reaching out. It could be confirmation bias, where I have a set thing I'm going to do. I'm going to take all the money. I'm going to go into business or whatever it is. And anything saying to the contrary is pushed aside. Why? We've explored this before, probably because of a fear of being wrong. So we can go on, and probably, and this is self-serving, I guess, the best thing a person can do when they come into a windfall is to hire a financial therapist to really help them work through the issues and consider all of the options and the consequences of the money before they do a thing with it. Because there's all sorts of people out there that are there to separate you from your money. So I would encourage you to send a copy of this podcast to anybody that you know that might be receiving a lot of money or anticipating it, and hopefully can help them get things in order so that they don't end up to be that person that files bankruptcy in 3 to 5 years. So thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to talking with you next time. Take care. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.